Welcome back to AP Statistics. This is Dr. Kling. Again, not affiliated with the College Board. Today's topic is, I call it experiments. It's really the beginning. We're going to begin to talk about methods in statistical analysis, or methods in research methods. And a lot of this is logic. You might just call it common sense. And then what we're going to do is throw some sort of standard jargon around this common sense. So for example, take a question like this. Does, let's say, having health insurance increase your use of medical care, and does it improve health outcomes? And you can think of two ways to answer that question. One is you can go out and you can find people who have health insurance and don't have health insurance and compare them in terms of medical care and the quality of their health. The other way is you can randomly give some people health insurance and others no health insurance, and then compare after a while their use of medical care and improvement in health outcomes. So the first approach, where you just go out and see and just find people with and without health insurance, is called an observational study. And the second approach, where you randomly assign some people to get health insurance and others not to, is an experiment. And the difference between the two is, in an observational study, the who got what we would call the treatment variable is not in the investigator's control. In an experiment, the investigator controls who gets the treatment variable, or the investigator assigns which one gets the treatment variable. So the treatment variable is what we might think of changing. From a policy perspective. So it could be, so in this example, it's the health insurance. Do you want to have a policy that helps people get health insurance, or do you not want to have such a policy? So that the treatment variable is the health insurance, and the response variable is the outcome variable. And in this case, we had two outcome variables to think about. One of them was the use of medical care. We could measure people's spending on medical care as the outcome variable, or health outcomes. We could have some measure of, well, we could just, for example, use death rate as a measure of health outcomes. So those would be response variables. And it's And again, the difference between an observational study and an experiment is over whether you just observe different people who get different treatment variables, or whether you assign the treatment variable to different people in the sample. So you have an experiment, and we have an observational study. And what we've just said is that with the treatment is assigned and just found. You just you see in an observational study, some people have gotten the treatment variable and some people haven't. For example, if you were looking at schools and spending on schools and how does that affect school outcomes, you could go to Montgomery County schools versus Prince George's County schools and say, gee, they spend more at Montgomery County, and then compare the outcomes in Montgomery County. But and that would be an observational study. An experiment would be to randomly assign students to schools that spend more, or alternatively randomly spend more on certain schools. I guess random assignment of students would be the best way to do that as an experiment. Okay, so some of the advantages of an experiment include the issue of causality is relatively easy to establish. If you're the one who's assigning the treatment, you can pretty much be sure that the treatment is causing the response. Observational study, causality can be hard to establish. So in this example of schools, if you're spending, if you find that the outcomes in Montgomery County are better than Prince George's County, you can't necessarily say that that was caused by the higher spending in Montgomery County. And part of the reason is you have what are called lurking variables, which are variables other than the treatment that could affect the outcome. And the lurking variables in an experiment are randomized. That is, there's not likely to be a systematic relationship between a lurking variable and whether somebody got the treatment or not. Whereas an observational study, they're not randomized. So, for example, again, if we're using schools, you might have wealthier students in Montgomery County, and they might have lots of advantages that have nothing to do with the actual quality of the school that enables them to have better school outcomes. And that's the case of a lurking variable and confounding effect means that the lurking variable actually creates is confounded with the treatment. So if Montgomery County students are wealthier and that affects their outcomes, then that confounds the effect of the supposed treatment of just spending more on schools. So a confounding effect in an experiment is less likely. I mean, it still can happen, but it'll be more accidental. Confounding effect observational study, I would say, can be very likely, and so there are these many problems with observational studies relative to experiments. Experiments are more of a gold standard in terms of methods. There's also, let me just say, a sort of an in-between concept which economists in particular like to talk about, which is a natural experiment. So again, if you're thinking of suppose you're trying to compare a charter school to a public school. Well, if you just look at a sample of students from the charter school and a sample of students from the public school, then you're doing an observational study. So an observational study would take a sample from each school. And the problem is the public school may draw a different type of student than the charter school. But a natural experiment is, suppose that, and we've seen this, that a city will give scholarships to charter schools, but assign those scholarships by lottery. So you look at a lottery to get into the charter school, and then you compare the winners who went to the charter school with the losers, that is, people who entered the lottery and so presumably are similar to the winners on average, and but they ended up in the public school. And so you compare just those groups rather than a random sample of the public school. You focus on public school students who were in the lottery for the charter school, and rather than looking at all charter schools, you look at the students who were in this lottery. And that would give you a better idea whether the treatment variable of the charter school versus the public school is what's making the difference, or whether there are other factors that make a difference. So that's called a natural experiment. And I think I'll stop there.